Miranda Everhart often stayed late after practice. As one of her school's top track and field athletes, that was to be expected. But she'd always held herself to a higher standard than most. Being an overachiever was just how she was wired. Even as a kid, others often remarked how seriously she took something as minor as a grade school soccer game. But that kind of mentality helped her become a star athlete. It also promised to earn her a scholarship to multiple colleges. Many teachers, coaches, and peers believed she had a bright future ahead of her. But those same people often worried that she pushed herself too hard. However, they didn't know that Miranda had her own unique ways of dealing with stress. While she preferred to keep most of those methods private, as she had always been a private person by nature, one particular way had proven quite effective in recent months. And it had to do with her boyfriend, Victor Alden, who happened to be another overachieving athlete on the school baseball team. "Don't stay too late, Miranda," said Coach Helena as she packed up the track and field gear. "At some point, even you have to rest." "I'll be fine, Coach," Miranda assured her as she did a series of stretches near the end of the track. "I promise I'll be rested before the big match this weekend." "I expect you to keep that promise. You're too young and talented to burn yourself out." "I appreciate your concern, but don't worry. I can handle it." Coach Helena shook her head as she finished packing up. Even from a distance, Miranda could tell she wasn't convinced. Her old soccer coach gave her that same look last fall. They all seemed genuinely worried that she had pushed herself too hard. If only they knew how skilled she was at enduring the strain. Miranda did a few more laps on the track until Coach Helena was out of sight. At one point, she glanced over to the other field to see that the baseball team was finishing up as well. Most of the team had already returned to the locker room to shower and change. Some had already left. But like always, Victor stayed late to do some batting practice. When it looked like his coach was ready to call it a night, he smiled towards her and waved. Miranda smiled and waved back. It was a simple gesture, but it sent a subtle message that came in loud and clear. "Time to hit the showers," Miranda said to herself, still smiling. With the sun setting and the fields mostly vacant, Miranda returned to the girls' locker room. She only passed one other teammate along the way, Deborah, who was on her way out and talking to her mother on the phone to pick her up. By the time she opened her locker, stripped out of her sweaty uniform, and retrieved her towel and toiletries, she was completely alone. Peace and quiet, Miranda mused. Perfect. Humming to herself, she made her way towards the large group shower areas. It was still wet and somewhat steamy. Most of the team had already used it. She could even smell hints of the overpriced shampoo that Irene Whalen often used after practice. That didn't bother her. She didn't like showering around other girls in the first place. After setting her towel aside, Miranda turned the shower at the far end on and waited for the water to get hot, which didn't take long. Once it was ready, she let out a content sigh and stood under the hot torrent of water. Just what I needed," Miranda said. For a few brief moments, she just stood there and enjoyed the feeling of hot water flowing over her sore muscles. Being an overachiever, she worked up plenty of sweat and grime. Even though she was used to it, that didn't make a hot shower afterward any less relaxing. It was one of the best parts of her day. But it was hardly enough to relieve all the stress and strain she'd accumulated. As she stood under the water, she heard the faint sound of the door to the girls' locker room opening and closing. In most other circumstances, this would be concerning. She was the last one from her team to finish. But Miranda wasn't worried. Instead, she found herself smiling in anticipation. "Might have spoken too soon," she said under her breath. The aspiring athlete remained under the torrent of water, hugging her shoulders and enjoying the feeling. A light steam had already built up in the stalls. She glanced briefly to her right to see the bottle of shampoo and conditioner she'd brought with her. But she held off on reaching for it, waiting another minute for what she hoped would bring some real stress relief. Finally, she sensed it. Someone entered the shower stall with her. They might have thought they'd been sneaky, not making a noise before slipping in through the cloud of steam. But Miranda knew. And as soon as she felt a familiar figure approach, she didn't bother hiding her reaction. "Hey," said a deep, masculine voice that had no business being in a girl's locker room. "Hey yourself," Miranda replied, not even turning around as she smiled to herself. It was Victor. She knew that voice well. She felt a hand on her waist, followed by a firm squeeze. A powerful arm wrapped around her from behind, another hand finding its way to her shoulder, trailing softly down her arm. Miranda let out a soft, affectionate purr. This was the true relief she needed. "Do you have any idea how much trouble we could get in for this?" he asked casually. "I don't like to think about it," Miranda replied, now leaning into his embrace. "Do you care how big a risk I take? Sneaking in the girls' locker room to be with my girlfriend. Of course I care. That's why I like to make the risk worthwhile." With a devious grin, Miranda turned around and embraced her lover. His bare chest was pressed up against hers, the heat of his body mingling with the warmth of the shower. He was a tall, fit, and handsome young man. She was a lucky girl. Being overachievers, they learned early on in their relationship how well they complemented one another. He kissed her passionately, his strong hands exploring her back. His lips brushed against hers, slow and deliberate, before parting just enough to let his tongue tease hers. The kiss deepened, a silent conversation of longing and need, as their breaths mingled, hearts pounding in unison. Miranda didn't hesitate to reciprocate, letting out an approving sigh as her hands caressed his broad shoulders. Their bodies pressed together, and the water pouring down on them only made it feel better. It was almost as if they were melting into each other, the hot water serving as the perfect embrace. Victor's hands slid down her slick back and gripped her hips, anchoring her against him. The strength in his grip surprised her. She gasped at the feeling, her pulse quickening. His fingers traced the contours of her back, moving lower, savoring every inch of her. "You're really in the mood tonight," Miranda teased, brushing her lips against his jaw. "I always am when I'm around you," he murmured, his voice thick with desire. She smirked, pressing another slow kiss against his lips. The steam enveloped them, cocooning them in warmth as they savored the stolen moment, bodies entwined, the rest of the world melting away beyond the tiles and mist.